Hi, my name is Mark Iskowitz. I'm editor-at-large for MM&M, and welcome to today's webinar, Securing the Bottom of the Funnel, Evolved Omnichannel and Programmatic Strategy. We're sponsored by Veradigm. And before I introduce my co-speakers for this session, Damon Bash and Keith Matt, I'll just say a few words to let you know what to expect. As a media channel, point of care was just about 2.2% of the pharma marketing budget, but saw big increases last year, from 42% in 2022 to about 55% in 2023. That's according to MM&M's own data on pharmaceutical marketing budgets. It's defined to encompass media in both patient and HCP-facing settings. Today, we're going to be talking about a point-of-care channel that straddles mainly the professional audience, the electronic health record, or EHR. At a simple level, it's a marketing channel. But EHR's immediacy to the point of care makes it a bottom-of-the-funnel tactic and one of the most potent in the pharma marketer's armamentarium. As efforts increasingly focus on ensuring success here, applying programmatic methods to advertising in EHRs has emerged as an essential element of effective omnichannel marketing. And so as Omni evolves dramatically, and strategy, activation, and measurement of programmatic media within healthcare providers' EHRs are taking new forms and delivering dramatic results for those who are able to understand and adapt with the times. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we'd like to have an interactive discussion on how you can most effectively target HCPs with precision and timeliness. I'll now introduce my co-speakers. Damon Bash is Vice President of Digital Health Media at Veradigm. He's an industry leader on healthcare marketing strategies within EHR systems. Damon's specialty involves enhancing the connection between HCPs and strategic partners through innovative EHR messaging and strategies. And joining Damon and myself is Keith Matt. Keith is Vice President of Sales at PulsePoint. PulsePoint is a global programmatic healthcare technology company using real-time data. After having worked for and with many of the largest pharma companies, Keith's role at PulsePoint involves leading a team that collaborates with brands and agencies to develop and deploy sophisticated programmatic strategies to reach, engage, and measure healthcare audiences. Keith and Damon, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be with you today.
Thank you, Mark.
Likewise.
Great to see you.
Likewise, great to have you both here. And just some housekeeping before we jump into the discussion. This will be a roughly 40-minute interactive panel talk, which I'll be moderating. We'll leave about 15 minutes for questions at the end, so please don't hesitate to submit your questions for Damon and Keith through the Q&A box on your webcast dashboard. Okay, so without further ado, on to our discussion. Damon, I was hoping that you could kind of start us off here. Obviously the EHR channel can be used to provide relevant messaging to physicians and other providers. But can you explain how EHR and point of care have evolved within the programmatic media ecosystem within the past year or so?
Yeah, I'd love to. And just to set the stage a little bit as we dig into this conversation, for the listeners that don't know Keith and I, it's important to know that he and I worked together for over 10 years. In EHR marketing together in the very, very, very beginning when the very first EHRs, ours, was available for marketers to communicate with HCPs. So, we want to talk about what's evolved quickly since then, but I can tell you in the past year, programmatic capabilities, programmatic scale, programmatic demand around EHR has gone through the roof. And there are a number of reasons for that. But just taking a step back to when Keith and I started together, and I'm so happy to be able to speak with him along with you today because we're great friends. It was the most managed service approach that you could possibly think of in HCP marketing because we were in front of medical legal teams. We were in front of brand teams who were trying to understand what this new innovative approach to communicating with a physician looks like. Privacy, compliance, best practices, case studies. And so we were trying to generate in a very handhold, kid glove kind of way, an experience that was brand new. And then this was long before we were able to connect the dots to an omni-channel approach, let alone programmatic, which when we started wasn't even a twinkle in the eye for HCPs, for HCP marketers. So fast forward to where we are now. There are simply more players in the market, and that's a good thing. All ships rise. There is such a groundswell for point of care that we actually have a point of care marketing association. There's such interest on the agency side that we have point of care and even EHR centers of excellence in all of the major agencies that we work with. But programmatic was slightly lagging behind. And there are reasons for that. And a lot of those reasons have now been overcome. And Keith can speak much more eloquently than I can about the value proposition of programmatic. And by the way, the managed service business is still going extremely strong. And it is a channel that benefits from a managed service approach, but complemented by programmatic. What I've seen is nothing short of a major movement in a complementary way of a hybrid strategy, managed service and programmatic. There's more inventory there. The platforms are better able to serve EHR marketing buyers. And I can tell you that I personally get a call a week from another DSP saying, we have demand, what can you do? Now, there are a lot of problems with that too, and I think we should talk about the good and the bad and what good looks like. We love to see the demand, but it is still a nuanced market, and it still requires a nuanced sell, which is why for Keith and I in particular, we've had such a tremendous partnership with PulsePoint, because he is in his own right an EHR marketing expert. So we could talk a little bit more about that, but I don't know, Keith, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, really well said. I would echo that David and I are really good friends. This is going to be a fun 30 minutes. Pretty cool to be able to do this with him. Look, I think I agree with everything that Damon just said. And running in parallel to that is a massive shift to programmatic in the industry as a whole. So at PulsePoint, obviously, we're delivering programmatic activation across a number of different channels, and we see the growth across all of those channels. And I think it also coincides with the focus around omnichannel, and we've heard the term omnichannel for several years now. And frankly, if you go to any conference or you sit down with any folks in the industry, a lot of the discussion is around omnichannel, but have we really actually executed that in a proper way? Well, probably not. But now with the advent of technology and DSPs and programmatic, backed by the wave of importance around programmatic, EHR has become a part of that story, if you will. So if you think about omnichannel, you really can't execute omnichannel without point of care. Can't do point of care without EHR, right? It is the main or most effective driver in terms of changing or influencing provider behavior. And so that whole picture is sort of the story of what's happening right now with our clients, right? They want to activate programmatically for all the inherent benefits and value of doing so, and we can get into sort of what that looks like. But they also want to be at the end of the funnel at the point of care when doctor is sitting with patient, and to be able to combine that with programmatic is pretty attractive. And so for all those reasons, we're starting to see a shift, and things are lining up with exactly what Damon outlined there. People are calling either Veradigm or PulsePoint. Hey, how do we get into the EHR space? How can you help us, tell us, and educate us about what you can do in that space? So pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. And, I noted recently the data that showed that U.S. media buys were up about 8% the year to August, or the 12 months to August. This is according to Guideline. And programmatic and premium programmatic led the way there. So to your point, Keith, and to both your points, we're seeing a massive shift to programmatic, including in healthcare. You mentioned a couple other really interesting points that I wanted to follow up on in terms of, I think Damon said, we're seeing a lot of the obstacles having been overcome, and the kind of the EHR business as it relates to that is kind of becoming this kind of hybrid between managed service and programmatic. But I kind of wanted to follow up on that point by asking you, what are some of the things you both learned about the unique challenges and opportunities around programmatic EHR marketing strategy, and I guess obviously integrating it within Omnichannel?
So, Keith, if you don't mind, I'll jump on that first and then pass off. So I mentioned couple of minutes ago that we're getting DSPs reaching out to us that I've never heard of that historically have been DTC or non-endemically focused, saying we have demand. And of course, they go out and they try and build their network and say who has inventory, who is a quote unquote publisher, and we come up quite often. So there's the same conversation on repeat that happens. The first step is, well, you need to understand the privacy and the compliance requirements around operating in an EHR. It's a little bit different than the standard quote unquote publisher that you'd connect to. A little pause there. Then we start talking about what scale means. Right? This is bottom of the funnel conversion environment, and the numbers are smaller, but the precision is greater. Well, scale, that's another issue they're not used to really talking about, because in their world, scale is top of funnel large. Then you start talking about cost, conversion channel, EHR, clinical workflow, point of care is premium, to your point. Their sales teams are not used to selling CPMs that are hundreds and hundreds higher than what they're used to normally buying in bottom of the funnel. And so you start to put these, I don't call them obstacles, but they're things that they don't know together, and they'll connect. It's easy to connect to any DSP now. The technology is there, but they won't necessarily understand the nuance of how to sell point of care, bottom of the funnel, or EHR. And so they'll get objections. Some of them they may not hear, since it's hands-on keyboard and they're not there all the time, about cost, about scale, about conversion. And that's where kind of those who succeed and those who don't really differentiate. So PulsePoint, again, Keith is an EHR marketing expert. His team has been doing this for a while. They're trained. They understand how to put programs together that represent omnichannel top to bottom of funnel, understanding the differences in scale, the differences in cost, and still performing exceptionally well. And so that's really where I've seen growth in the demand, but yet it's only a few that can do it well and do it right. And the other thing I would say is that for us, it's not passive revenue. It's not set it and forget it. You know, we're to some extent maybe losing the control point on a customer because we're giving it to PulsePoint as a reseller, if you will, of our inventory. But they very much need us, as do their clients, to understand kind of the bespoke nature of understanding an audience in EHR, of good tactics, sometimes what the creative assets should look like, best use cases. So it requires a lot of back and forth, which not all DSPs are accustomed to having. They like to feed inventory. They like to build a base of NPIs in the case of HCP, and they like to deploy and activate. But in point of care, it requires more hands-on. And I think that's where we've been able to achieve the greatest success with PulsePoint, is because we're able to do that.
Yeah, I would just echo that. You know, it's interesting when I think back to like when Damon and I started at Veradigm 12, 13 years ago. I had a lot less gray hair. Damon hasn't aged one bit. But, you know, we did a lot of, over the first couple years, educating around what is an EHR? How are doctors utilizing EHR? Why is it a different channel than connected TV or audio or general display? And you know, it was backed by like a lot of government incentives and programs around you know, getting doctors or incentivizing doctors to utilize EHRs. And so that was 12 years ago. And so we took that knowledge and we communicated to the pharma sector and to the agency partners, and we did a lot of educating. Well, fast forward 12 years, Programmatic is now starting to activate in the EHR space. And so we're doing a lot of that educating again, because we're talking to programmatic teams that through no fault of their own, they just haven't activated in an EHR space. And so it's different. It's a different animal. And with it comes a lot of the things Damon outlined, different frequencies, different scale and reach, different CPM and pricing. And so that's all awesome. Like, those are great conversations that we're having, but it sort of reminds me of like where we were 12 years ago when we were actually launching the ability to integrate commercially sponsored programs into an electronic health record. We're doing that all over again, but in a programmatic sense. And with that comes nuances and things that we have to educate our customers around. That's why we're doing things like this webinar, but great conversations. And it's just getting folks that have traditionally worked in a programmatic fashion to understand some of those nuances and how it's different than perhaps another channel that they're activating on. And so we've done that. We've been doing it for the last 18 months or so with Veradigm, and you know, it's been great. The other thing I would say is our goal with communications like this, and as we go collaboratively to clients and talk to them, it's about optionality, right? And so you can still purchase Veradigm inventory, commercially sponsored programs in their EHR directly through Damon and his team, or you can do it programmatically. And that's a pretty cool place to be as a buyer of media, right? Having the optionality in how you want to do that. And there's value in doing both. And that's sort of how we've approached our partnership. And I think it's worked pretty well.
Yeah, fascinating. Oh, go ahead, Damon.
Oh, just another interesting dynamic that occurred to me as Keith was talking. So, Keith and I talk regularly, and he'll say, we're bringing on board some other EHR inventory. And, they are very selective about the quality and the types of inventory that comes in, because there's a lot of inventory that is not so great for a whole host of reasons. But one of the difference between managed service, which we do all the time, and programmatic is that when Keith tells me that he's bringing more inventory in, I'm thrilled. And the reason why is that it's a marketplace, and they're all the places that we cannot be, and it's a one-to-many connection point for buying into different sources of EHR inventory, which means that more people go there, and it means that portion of the revenue bucket grows and proves itself out. So some of these other players I would compete with in a managed service environment, and I do. But in programmatic, I don't, because collectively all ships rise. And so that's kind of an interesting difference between managed service and what we do on that side directly versus, the pulse point model.
Yeah, and I like how you both were talking about the differences, when DSPs come along and they have to, discover that the EHR comes with different scale, pricing, reach, and all of that. And, when they think of, something that's a play for scale, it's usually, like you said, top of funnel. This is bottom of the funnel, and it's priced appropriately. And it makes me think that, in the data I mentioned earlier, that programmatic, especially premium programmatic, has really led the charge over the past year when we look at overall growth in advertising media spend. And this is one of the, I think, most special aspects of premium programmatic, because it is this kind of special, ecosystem with its own nuances, and relies on these relationships that you have with, like between a pulse point and a Veradigm. That kind of leads to our next question. How is the programmatic approach in EHR different than top of funnel strategies, and how so?
I'll jump in there, and then Damon can add his thoughts too. By the way, to your point there, I couldn't agree with you more. So, I think for many years, programmatic was sort of viewed as like, here's a way to access remnant inventory at a low cost. And that literally couldn't be further from the truth now. Some of the things we're doing here at PulsePoint is really heavily focused around curating markets and developing high value inventory and content. EHR is like a perfect example of that, right? And we're doing a lot of things in the endemic space that, maybe EHR falls into that or doesn't. But, it's all about like, how do you access premium inventory and then loop that in using technology into an omnichannel approach and orchestrating a media campaign that way. In terms of your question, like, how is it different? So, it's a lot of stuff we talked about already. It's nuanced in the EHR space. And so there's many things that apply to that apply to EHR that perhaps don't apply to other channels that you could activate programmatically. And so things you need to think about is like, what's the creative? So at a point of care in a clinical setting, are we delivering the right creative to the physician treating the patient? And is that the same creative that you would display on a general open internet? Well, probably not. For example, we were just meeting with a client last week that, has a branded product in a highly genericized market. And so they wanted to communicate, dispense DAW type messaging. Well, that's totally makes sense. And that's a great strategic approach within a clinical environment like an EHR. Probably not as appropriate for other channels. And so those are some of the things you need to think about: frequency and cost, and how is it orchestrated within the other channels. Those are some other things that are a little bit different in the EHR space. And this is why we're having all these discussions and meetings with folks that are maybe new to the space programmatically. And so these are great conversations to have. but it is certainly nuanced, and understanding those nuances and being able to communicate them and help our partners to best effectively drive these programs is super important. And I think, in collaboration with Veradigm, we've been able to do that over the last 12 or 18 months.
Yeah, and I'd say I'd agree with that. And I'd say another, kind of differentiator is that PulsePoint is playing with massive data sets, massive device and identity graphs, fingertip ready claims data. And that's wonderful data to plan a holistic omni-channel strategy around. They do that every day. When we're working managed service, we have our own first-party data. We have a business associate agreement with our providers, which comes with both a responsibility to manage the data in an appropriate way, but also the ability to interrogate it and to understand clinical behaviors, to understand different types of cohorts and segmentations, to take a look at market baskets, to take a look at specified triggers based upon a key differentiation for a brand. And so in the direct sales model, the managed service model, we're really consultants, and we build these really bespoke, very often trigger targeted campaigns that can run complementary to programmatic, using different types of data. That's why in my world, and where we've seen success, is when marketers are using a hybridized approach. They're getting all of the benefits and efficiencies and measurement of working in a programmatic ecosystem, and all of the really precision targeting at point of care, at conversion, leveraging the data that we have to work with that can give them insights that they just can't get anyplace else. So that requires more work, right? It requires, in some cases, cross-functional efforts between a programmatic buying team and a direct buying team. We're starting to see the agencies get more and more effective at doing that. In my mind, that's the way a channel like this should be looked at.
Yeah, it requires a lot more coordination to make the magic happen, which brings us to the partnership between Veradigm and PulsePoint, which by all accounts here seems to be going very well. But not all DSPs are having success with EHR or POC, apparently. Why do you think that is? And I'm sure that's kind of speaks to the nuances that you both talked about, but can you kind of elaborate on that point?
I think more and more they will. I think there's a period of learning. Again, Keith and I have spent 12 years going deep down the rabbit hole on EHR. And it's difficult to imagine someone selling all forms of programmatic inventory and finding a way to sprinkle in EHR, particularly when, from a dollar volume perspective, it's going to be a smaller part of an overall buy. So getting the mind share of the actual salesperson, of the sales manager, time in a presentation or a call or a relationship build with the buyer on the buy side, those are all things that we have to deal with, right? And I think that the partner has to prioritize an understanding, a DSP partner, an understanding of EHR, a point of care, training of the sales team who are customer facing and talking to these buyers every single day, and then prioritization on their recommendations and their consulting, because it can be easy to go for the big ticket streaming TV bundle and then somehow forget to include bottom of the funnel conversion. In my mind, that's irresponsible, but there is a path to a deal for the people who are out there selling it. PulsePoint kind of uniquely understands the need for their team to fully sell through EHR. In the beginning of the launch, we talked a lot about go-to-market. We talked a lot about how the sales team is to be trained, how they're to be incentivized, how they're going to put this story together in the connective tissue, top of funnel to bottom. That was a lot of work, but it was really important work. Now, Veradigm can't possibly do that with a dozen plus DSPs out there that are trying to step into this space. But we can pick those that have a right to win and collaborate and partner together. And invariably, we did in this case, and had absolutely tremendous success. So look, we'll start learning as we do this. We're learning about pricing. We're learning about sell-through. We're learning about how to put these bundles together in a way that the buyers are asking us to do it in. It's an incredible process, but clearly we've latched on to something here, and certainly so with PulsePoint because of the success that we're having. But going back to my earlier statement, it is not passive revenue for someone like us. We really need a partner that we can do something like this with, and all the work that went into us being in a position to speak about this the way that we are today, that was a process, and a really good one.
Yeah, just to add to that, we are focused on EHR because our clients are focused on EHR. Our clients are asking us for this type of inventory, and they're asking for access to it programmatically. And so in many ways, we're responding to the market need that's been outlined by our clients. I think the obvious is, look, Damon and I have a great relationship, and that's helped with the integration. But when I came to PulsePoint and our clients were asking for point of care and EHR, it was an easy transition for me to go to Veradigm and say, hey, let's try to create a partnership. One, because they are the leader in terms of integrating commercially sponsored programs into their platform. They have what I would call best practice or gold standard in terms of compliance and oversight in the market around EHR in a market, in a channel where there's a lot of lack of transparency, frankly. They are as transparent as it gets. So they were like an easy answer to initially start an EHR strategy, and it's gone really well since that. But, on the PulsePoint side, when I look at the sort of programmatic landscape, we own a big portion of the HCP market. Part of the reason is we're responding in ways to clients. We're responding to clients in ways and addressing things that they're asking for. And EHR is frankly one of them. So, it was an obvious and easy answer for us in terms of how do we complete the omnichannel approach? How do we integrate at the point of care? And how do we do it programmatically and be able to leverage all the inherent value of doing that? And then do it with partners that allow us to be transparent and ensure that we're running programs effectively, but also that are safe for our agency partners and our pharma clients to engage with. So it's been a great partnership. Look, we have some expertise on the PulsePoint side in this space that I think is a little bit better than perhaps some others in the industry, and I think that's helped too. But first and foremost, it's just been a great partnership with Veradigm. They're transparent, they're great at what they do, and when you combine those types of things, then you're bound to have some success, and we have.
Sure. I want to build on something that you both talked about earlier as another one of the nuances here that, when new DSPs join the conversation, that you have to educate them on, and that is the ethics and compliance of sponsoring a commercially bought program within the EHR. How does EHR advertising safely fit into the evolved omnichannel strategy for pharma companies and their agencies? And how do you kind of address that challenge?
There's nobody better to answer this than Dave.
It could be a direct question or it could be a programmatic question. Well, I think that having done this for 12 years, we have compliance privacy oversight that probably rivals pharma because we are a clinical software company. We process claims. We're a real-world data warehouse and research company. And so we're very, very good at working with data and on working through data rights appropriately and protecting data, de-identifying data, doing all of those things that are required to make sure that everyone is protected, providers, patients, our pharma customers, our government customers. And so that's just the world that we live in. Keith had mentioned earlier that there is other inventory out there. And I hate to just call us inventory, but it's the nature of the conversation that comes from, Trojan horse backdoor connected apps, or comes from places where you don't necessarily know what the data rights are involved with using the data, what the reporting rights are, where the message is being delivered. And in many cases, people will buy that without necessarily understanding the difference between a quality platform with all of that compliance infrastructure and one that doesn't have it. So at this point, all of our customers are very comfortable with where we advertise in an EHR, what we advertise in an EHR, the transparency of our reporting around EHR. So we've kind of gone through that Rubicon and come out the other side at this point. So for our direct or managed service clients, that the onus is not as high as it used to be because we've earned the right to have their trust in that regard. Programmatic, and you may be getting some different questions, Keith. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're getting a lot of, yeah, in some ways. But, I think I would echo what Damon said. Look, when we, on the programmatic side, we look to our supply partners and identify who we want to create partnerships with. And we base that on, are they following guidelines and are they compliant? And Veradigm is a great example of a company that is. And so we feel very safe and comfortable partnering with them in a space that's working within that, it's a clinical environment. The questions that we get from our pharma clients, this is all part of the education process, right? This is all part of the process that Damon and I went through 10, 12 years ago when we were introducing EHR just in general to pharma. We're doing that again with some of our programmatic partners, and they're great questions. And to be able to safely answer those questions because we have partners like Veradigm is super important. And we're able to do so. So, look, I think these are all great questions. They're all great topics to discuss with our client, and we're happy to do so. And we, because we have some expertise on the pulse point side in this channel, we're able to effectively answer them. And I think that's, again, goes back to sort of the other question mark that you asked is like, why is the partnership working so well? Well, we're able to have collaborative discussions around things like compliance and oversight and communicate that back to our clients effectively.
Sure. That's a great responses from you both about the need for absolute compliance and privacy when we deal with these clinical environments, and obviously the creative has to be presented in such a way that it is on the right side of all of those rules. I want to ask a data related question. And then I have a follow-up question from an audience member here I want to get to. But first, what data is utilized to implement commercial EHR programs? And, you mentioned claims data, that and Veradigm is a real-world, data warehouse, Damon. But can you elaborate on that? And how is success measured?
So, the NPI is obviously the primary data point for the work that we do with PulsePoint. They're using all of their capabilities and all of their data assets to help build segments of NPIs and to target segments of NPIs on our platform. So in terms of the programmatic relationship, it kind of begins and ends there. On our side, we're using primarily data for triggers for campaigns, looking for white space, looking for high propensity audiences, for example, a provider treating a patient with diabetes who's on metformin and has HbA1c outside of value. We know that patient is not doing well, and maybe it's time to step up to a novel therapy, a DPP-4, SGLT2, something like that. And I'm by no means recommending any clinical behaviors. But we use the data to understand specific de-identified patient encounters so that you, the pharma marketer, can be present with an appropriate message outside of the e-prescribing workflow to help the physician with anything they may need to understand that the drug is available, that is good coverage for that patient so they can afford it, and anything else that is within our business rules to help that physician at that time. So we're using data a little bit differently. We're using it to say these are lookalike physicians. Maybe they're not on your call plan. Maybe they're no-see, low-see physicians. Maybe they're lower decile, but you can hit them with precision in this environment, and it's worth a spend. And we have case studies that show that when you do that outside of that target list, the return can be explosive because they can be message naive physicians. They're not called on by reps, and they really benefit from seeing this type of messaging. So, and then on the other side of it, we look at the data to look at behaviors differently as well. So Keith's team may be looking at claims data. Was there a return on advertising investment? Were more prescriptions written? Obviously, that is a key metric. But we're able to look with our campaign reps at other things. Has the market basket changed? Are different patient populations getting prescribed more than others? for this type of a drug. We can look at trend data that we have rights to look at, again, de-identified data, to give a little bit more color around why a prescription volume may have changed up or down. And again, you blend that with a programmatic NPI-based strategy and all of the performance tools that Keith has on his side, and you can tell a really nice story with that. And we're always looking for more case studies to do just that. Despite the fact that we've been at it for 18 months, it's still relatively new. But in my mind, that's what good looks like when we're able to do that.
Yeah, and to add to that, so on the programmatic side, with PulsePoint, we're triangulating around the NPI, right? And so in the front end, in terms of activation, we map that NPI to our identity graph, and so we then use that NPI. The beauty of programmatic is we can understand when a physician is on EHR, and then they're on connected TV, and then they're on a podcast via audio or a general open internet website. And so therein lies the beauty of omnichannel approach, right? So we can track that NPI across their journey wherever they are. So that's sort of the front end beauty of programmatic. On the back end, just as Damon said, like we have claims data integration, and we're partnering with Veradigm in unique ways to access their data and understand what's happening with this physician from a prescribing behavior. Are they prescribing more because they were exposed to media within an EHR environment? And so, I think we're doing this through partnerships with our EHR companies like Veradigm, but we're also doing it on the front end because we're leveraging our programmatic technology to sort of round out that omni-channel approach.
Sure. And here's the follow-up question from our audience. I think this is from the agency point of view. How would you address the challenge that performance marketers have with explaining to pharma clients about the notorious low viewability and low CTR with buying EHR programmatically?
I'll do the second one first. Low click-through rate is not, Keith is smiling because he and I have had this conversation with clients for over a decade. Click-through rate is not the key metric of success here. It's not a lead gen vehicle, and it's not really appropriate to expect a physician to click off a link to a landing page for a new experience when they're in the middle of a vital 12 to 15 minutes with a patient and a patient encounter. So, we tend to not look at click-through as a benchmark of success. We understand that others do, but EHR is a different animal. The viewability, I'm not quite sure if what they mean is how much time is being spent with the message. If that is what is meant, the viewability, at least with our platform, is somewhere around 30 seconds per impression, which is astronomically higher than what you would see with other types of vehicles. So from that standpoint, viewability is high, and it's also a walled garden. It's a double verified, sign-on for the physician. So we know exactly who they are, and the viewability is very, very, very high. So how do we measure? We measure some of the ways that we described. The key metric for everyone is going to be script volume, and we recognize that. But we overall look at changes in physician clinical behavior, and script is one of those things that we look at. So, hopefully that helps, but whoever asked that question, if it didn't, I think our email is, if it's not at the end of this, we can find a way to put it out there. I'm always happy to address these questions one-on-one.
Yeah, not much more to add there. Damon nailed it. The only other thing I would add is just, on the programmatic side is not only is there a change in behavior with the physician, but what other channels did we reach that same MPI on? And combining those, what was the impact versus siloed one channel versus another? But yeah, Damon nailed it.
Right. We want to look at sort of the incremental advantage of adding EHR to a media plan. So we're already finding ourselves in the Q&A here, so we're going to kind of continue with that. And thank you everybody out there for your great questions. Please keep them coming. Please use the Q&A box on your webcast dashboard, and we'll queue up your queries for Damon and Keith on integrating, say, commercially sponsored programs within the EHR, either managed services or programmatic. Here's another one for you both. What is your opinion regarding enhanced media For example, expandable banners on EHR platforms. Is it accepted and or helpful to get the HCP's attention? Good question.
Well, I'm sure it will get their attention. I'm not sure it's the kind of attention that you want. So from the physician's perspective, what we try and do with all of our might is make sure that whatever message the physician is getting in the workflow is something that is important to their clinical experience, to their specialty, or to their practice. And typically speaking, the feedback we get from our physicians is that we appreciate the media. Because we do that, once I have what I need, I want you to go away and let me practice medicine. So the concept of expandables, while definitely eye-catching, is not suitable for an EHR. I wouldn't be able to get that through our compliance department, not that I would try. Our physician feedback would be negative, not good for your brand. And also, remember, physicians are paying for the privilege of using these software systems. And so we want to make sure that their user experience is as positive as possible. So we make decisions. We've had many conversations about just that, expandables. We make decisions that make sure that the marketer is complementary in what they're delivering to the physician experience. And by doing so, it means you will have a better outcome on that message that's being delivered, and the physician will appreciate it that much more. So that's kind of the ethos that we use when we look at this.
Make it relevant to them. So it kind of goes back to the example I used, the DAW example, but think about the channel you're in. What would be relevant to that physician? Formulary messaging, cost savings, copay, things along those lines that can help the provider make that patient feel better, drive better outcomes, right? So to me, that's the most important thing within the EHR landscape versus the size of the banner ad or whatever that might be. And there's value in that, and I get it. But it's more about, is the message relevant to who the physician is and the types of patients they treat in their practice?
Excellent points. Absolutely. Underscoring, again, the, making sure the media and the creative is appropriate, for this venue.
Yeah.
Can you both address how patients fit into EHR media? We've seen, obviously, we know how this is a channel to expose physicians to, various messaging at the point of care. But this person actually wants to get at, how patients fit into that equation. And I think maybe, Keith and Damon, you started to talk about in terms of when you choose the appropriate media, it's the appropriate media that's going to help the physician, help the patient feel better and drive better outcomes.
Yeah, in that sense, they're secondary beneficiaries, well, primary really, but it is a physician-facing platform. So to be clear, there's no messaging or marketing capability within an EHR for the patient. However, there are definitely marketing interventions that are there specifically for the patients, not just the therapy, but Keith alluded to one of the big ones, which is cost. So one of the primary concerns about that physicians have, or that patients don't know the cost of their medication. The cost is too high. They don't fill. They don't refill. They don't adhere. You have a bad outcome. So we don't have specifically today a messaging capability to patients. We message patients on behalf of the physician all day long. Appointment reminders, pushing them to portal, giving them non-commercial resources, but we don't have a patient-facing solution. It's really that secondary benefit of the physician knows that the cost is low, that it has good tier coverage, or there's a copay program associated, or because the brand is so beneficial, it's medically necessary. That type of information helps them make a good diagnosing and prescribing decision, which leads to a better patient outcome, even if it's just about cost. And so that's what we do today. I am looking at a number of different patient-facing solutions, but I don't have anything to share with you all today. And believe me, when I do, I'll be shouting it from the hilltops.
Yeah, and at Pulse Point, we've done a lot of work around connecting the consumer and the patient with the physician, and how does that marry together, both on the front end from an activation standpoint, and does that actually have impact on the back end from measurement? So outside of the EHR network, as I mentioned, we sort of know who that NPI is, and we know what type of content they're engaging with and on what channels. We can then connect the consumer that way. So, patients likely to be treated by certain types of doctors. So that's sort of how we're doing it. That's not within the EHR environment. That's outside of it. But more to come there, I think, as we evolve, both within EHR and point of care, that connectivity will probably naturally come together. So
I agree.
To Damon's point, he's probably working on some cool things, and I'm sure we'll hear about it in the future.
Great. And, this is just something I was kind of curious about in terms of, I know you don't, you say that the patient is kind of a secondary stakeholder there, but what about other providers like the pharmacist? Is it possible to sync the programmatic advertising that you're using to address the physician audience with, say, pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, given that that is a kind of sister environment, if you will, in the point of care spectrum? Can you talk about kind of syncing messaging with those other types of providers?
So yes, and yes, we can reach programmatically. We can reach pharmacists sort of outside of an EHR environment through other channels. But remember, and Damon, there's probably no more foremost expert in sort of connecting the pharmacy to the EHR network than Damon. But remember, when a physician's in an EHR and he or she prescribes a medication, that's obviously going electronically to the pharmacy. So what we do and how we educate and what we talk to the physician about in the EHR environment trickles down to that pharmacist. I used the DAW example for a couple times already, right? So that's a way of educating the doctor to ensure a script is written and as the doctor intended and sent to the pharmacy and filled in that manner. So kind of a trickle down, sort of like what I talked about with patients too. Naturally, they come together. Programmatically, outside of EHR, yeah, we're reaching pharmacists and coordinating that with our efforts with patients and physicians. And Damon can speak a little bit more, but remember, the origin is in the EHR, and then it trickles down to the pharmacy from there.
Yeah, for the most part, our job ends when the physician sends that prescription. I do think that there are a lot more upstream workflows that are not commercially available to folks who are listening today, but good to know about, like prescription price transparency, like some of the advancements around prior auth for pharmacy benefit and medical benefit, like some of the middleware partners who are coming in and helping with script triage for specialty medications that go to limited distribution pharmacies or the right pharmacy that can fill, or non-commercial pharmacies that can onboard those patients for care coordination and support and hub programs. So there's an awful lot of complicated workflow that can take a lot of burden away from the physician, that can reduce the time to prior authorization, that can reduce the time to fill. But we don't have a commercial solution where pharma or an HCP marketer can step in and close that loop today between the provider and the pharmacy, other than kind of the standard plumbing that we have for sending those prescriptions where they're supposed to go.
Got it. Okay. And again, great questions from our audience. Please keep them coming. We do have a few minutes more with Damon and Keith. Here's a question. What is the importance of technology as applied to EHR marketing? Why are programmatic marketers investing in this space so heavily?
Yeah, I mean, really good question. I think we've hit on it in some ways throughout the discussion. Look, technology enables you a few different things. One, it can enable sort of that omnichannel approach that I've talked about quite a few times, but it enables you to orchestrate that media campaign in an automated way that maybe you couldn't do if you have to go vendor to vendor to vendor and set up programs. Well, now you can do it all within a platform like a DSP, like PulsePoint offers. So it's the orchestration of the media from a marketing perspective that's super effective. It's the real-time nature of doing that as well, right? And so the ability to pivot in real time, to control frequencies of messaging on various channels, all is done through technology. And then, on the back end, it's the ability to report in effective ways using technology in real time as well, right? And so, and some of this is available through direct partners with Veradigm as well. But, we have clinical insights that we have available in our DSP, and those are integrated with our claims data and provided in real time. And so That's incredibly valuable. But, overarching, it's sort of like this is why there's a shift to programmatic in the industry. It's because technology allows you the ability to do things in a more efficient and automated way that maybe you couldn't do in the past. And so we've applied that across almost every channel in the industry now, and EHR has come on board, and it's been really successful. And now our clients can get access to point of care and apply all the inherent values of tech against the point of care channel, in particular EHR. And it's been beneficial for a lot of our clients.
What I would add to that is one word: precision. So, we've been hearing about privacy and precision and audience quality again and again and again and again. The types of data, the data elements that are available to build audiences are getting better and better. The types of data we have to help do that is getting better. AI is driving the structuring of unstructured data, which gives us data elements that nobody's ever had before to understand audiences, whether it's the provider audience, the patient audience, a specific encounter. You need technology to process this data, to ingest this data, and to help to build audiences, to help in sub-seconds, to help devise a targeting strategy that takes advantage of these new data types. And we've talked already about the fact that physicians appreciate precision, particularly if they're being spoken to by sponsors, by commercial entities. They want to know that what's being delivered to them is in support of what they are doing and is not there for the wrong reasons, right? And so precision is necessary to do that, and technology is the underlying driver of that precision. And today, PulsePoint obviously does that really, really well. We do it really well on the real world data side, and we do it well with our first party data triggering, but it's only going to get better because the types of data we have to work with are just exploding now, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, sounds like it. Okay, here's another great question from our audience. How does measurement change, since we're on the subject of measurement, if we're not measuring prescriptions? For example, if we're marketing an OTC drug or supplement that still solves a patient need. Are there any nuances in case studies you've seen in that category? I guess the person's talking about the OTC or supplement areas.
Tough to measure on my side, that's for sure, because it's not a prescription, right? So we're looking at other types of signals, usually in collaboration with the client. We're looking at maybe there's more diagnoses or more other clinical outcomes to go back. It's not easy, to be honest. But on the same side of that coin, I'll also say that we have a number of over-the-counter therapies that have successfully partnered with us for years. Certain therapeutic areas tend to pop for me, like dermatology. That's one area where we've seen an awful lot of that. Allergy is another one. And there's several others. So I agree it's hard to measure, and usually it's our partner's obligation to look at their data to kind of triangulate around that. But we have gotten very good feedback, and the biggest signal to me is repeat customers around a number of different OTC brands. Keith probably has all sorts.
I always thought OTC is actually a fantastic fit for EHR because you're reaching the doctor before he or she actually prescribes a branded product.
That's true.
The opportunity to use OTC. So I always thought it was like a natural fit. There's few things like sometimes doctors actually prescribe OTC because the copay is less than if they bought it over the counter. So there is some data there on the back end to help show performance. And then, like in a standard media model, there's some metrics that we can provide to help you better understand OTC. And I would actually argue, the reporting of MPIs, if you're reporting on all the MPIs and you can provide that back, which PulsePoint's able to do in collaboration with Veradigm, there are some gaps in that with other EHR vendors. But if you can provide the full scope of the MPIs back to the client, they can fill it or put that into a marketing mix model. And do some analysis that way. So there's a few different ways to go in about it. But I actually, on a very high level, always thought OTC was a really good fit with EHR. And I think Damon's seen that on his platform. We have too, where we have a lot of brands engaging in EHR that are OTC in nature.
Great. We do have a couple more minutes for questions, so if anybody has a last-minute question for Damon and or Keith, we could probably squeeze one or two more in. I had just kind of a question on something I think, Damon, you mentioned earlier, sort of when we talk about these kind of bottom-of-the-funnel tactics, why are there so many, as you put it, points of exit there? Do you mean that, kind of there's so many areas where the message could get lost, or there could be sort of an unhelpful intermediary there? What do you mean by points of exit?
Well, that could be a webinar in and of itself. But the short version is that EHRs have built-in price transparency. And I'll try and summarize that in just a couple of quick steps. But we're pinging the payer to return the actual price of the therapy for that patient that's being seen. And they're being presented in real time, the provider, that is, with the price of the medication, therapeutic alternative suggested by the payer, whether or not prior authorization is required, cash pricing, and then pharmacy pricing, and then mail order pricing, and 30, 60, 90-day pricing. So the pricing obviously is a big piece of this, as well as the extra burden or time from a prior authorization, as well as the knowledge that a therapeutic alternative suggested by the payer might get more quickly to the pharmacy and cost that patient less. So if you're in a drug that has a market basket with it, all of those things can change the way a physician thinks about what the right medication choice is for that patient. And then you go further downstream. You talked about pharmacy. A drug could be sent to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist has discretion to swap that drug out for a generic or swap it out for a biosimilar if it costs less. And so not being there means that everything that you've done up until that point has 5, 6, 7, 8 different exit points where you can see leakage, unless you're there to support with the right kind of message, whether it's financial or otherwise, to ensure the physician still has a level of confidence staying the course on what their original choice was.
I'm going to leave it at that. Damon knows that subject inside and out, so he nailed it.
Once or twice, Keith, right? Once or twice we've told this story.
No, that was terrific. Thank you. Yeah, not much more needs to be said. And I think that's a good note to end our discussion on. I want to call it there. Damon and Keith, thank you so much for articulating, why it's so important and challenging as well to effectively apply programmatic advertising at the bottom of the funnel where providers spend their time, and things like how EHR advertising fits into the evolved omnichannel strategies that pharma companies and their agencies are using to address this challenge and other points. And if anybody has any other questions for either Damon or Keith, I'm sure they'd be more than willing to answer them offline, and you can reach them through contacting M&M. Okay, that was Damon Bash and Keith Matt. That was a terrific conversation. We hope you come back for another one. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. This has been Mark Iskowitz for Damon Bash and Keith Matt signing off. Take care.